Hello, people. Um, I got a new note taking. I'm trying the little one. Let's see. This week, not technically, not if I'm being honest. This week actually took. I want to say I read it slowly over a couple of months. It's The Civil War: A Narrative. I forgot to put the Shelby Foote, I think is his name. I forgot to put the author's name in my tiny notes. Of course I did. Um, I don't have a super detailed history of the Civil War in my head. I've been saving it actually because it seems like a good, healthy subject. Just didn't ever get into it. So this book came on sale and I actually bought all three of these because it seemed long. It seemed like he's going to go in depth. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a piece of that. It seemed like a good place to start. The rating, my rating's going to be 3 out of 5. This book, it's good. It could be better. It doesn't make any allowances for outsiders, right? So if you don't know every place name and if you don't know already every battle, it can get away from you in a bit almost, but not all the way, which is why it's not a 2. It's actually a 3. If you really like history, if you're already big into the Civil War, war history in general, you'll be able to enjoy this, and you'll enjoy it for 2 reasons. One, it is very informative. 2, it's he says a narrative. It actually is. We don't get bogged down with dates. He doesn't get lost. By that I mean it's of course a big meaty subject, but it's also one we know a lot about. It happened right in the middle of a time where people could sort of essentially record it, right? So you can have a full book on basically every battle in the Civil War, right? But you can't cover each section like that in one book, or what is it? You start to lose the picture of the whole because it's so much information coming at you, and I don't. It'd be hard to get a streamlined thought through, which he does. He makes the book like it's the war talking in a weird way, if that makes sense. So we'll bring up Lincoln, Sherman, Lee, Grant, all these famous people, more obviously. And he uses a broad brush and a detail brush. That's how I meant to say it. So instead of being all broad brush, which you lose the detail, and instead of being too much detail, which would be too fat to read in any kind of decent way, he does a mixture of both. So you get an understanding of who Lincoln was, sort of his upbringing. But then you also get moments of actual, like, individual conversations. And he somehow blends them together. He also blends them in a way that sounds like appropriate to the time. He uses their sort of language, their sort of, I say, syntax, which makes it funner to read. Now, I got the audio books, so I don't know if he put maps in the book. Maps would obviously help tremendously. But even without the maps, he doesn't get too bogged down in this platoon was here and that hill was there. It matters in certain individuals, right? Stonewall Jackson standing on a hill, not moving. It matters that he was on a hill. But you don't need to know the particular hill in such and such place, Virginia, or wherever it was, to get a sense of what happened. He constantly gives you the sense, and then he'll give you details. He does this number. So there's a lot of places in America, right? So even being in America, I don't know every one of these places' names by heart. Even I, getting lost, I don't know exactly where we are on the map. But it almost doesn't matter for the way he tells it. Because the moment you get too bogged down on the map, he leans back on the characters, the people who were involved, how it affected them, why they did it, etc., etc. And I think this is the real magic of this book, which if it could have been a little actually longer in a weird way. No, maybe not. See, even in reading it, I get the urge to go deeper into each little bit. But then I think that would lose the narrative that you have. This flow that's the actual war. So I think he did good. And if you're these type of people, I think you will enjoy it. But what you end with, which it's just one of three. It's almost like you see it like a cooking show, right? And you see them making the dough. And then you go to a restaurant and then food comes out. And in your mind, you can imagine now in more detail what the kitchen is. You don't know exactly the angle, the layout, but you know what a kitchen looks like now. You know the effort it would take, right? So if you apply that same idea, when you read Ancient Wars or World War II and I, or the 100 Years' War, whatever these things are, Marlborough's campaigns, right? We don't have all the details that we have for the Civil War, but it's still humans. So when you see Marlborough or Frederick the Great or Napoleon having issues with their parliament, with getting supplies on the ground, with all these other things, but you add the depth you have with this one, the politics, the interactions, the getting stuck in the mud, dudes getting just lost, dudes not being friendly to each other. You can almost weirdly apply that because you'll know this person didn't get along with that one in Napoleon's time. And you can start to imagine why, right? The historian gives you as many facts as possible. So you'll know this guy was born rich and such wasn't born rich. And you're like, I can already see why, maybe. And you can start forming these opinions from, that great distance away because of this book and books like it. Because of the depth you get out of the Civil War. So, in that sense, it even helps other histories you might be reading. Just keep that in mind. We bounce around a lot. And a lot of times, right? So it's you have Lincoln and Jefferson Davis, right? If you don't know who those people are fighting for, he doesn't have much of a break. Even the chapter breaks don't give you much of a break. In that we go from Lincoln and then we'll go to Davis. And if you don't keep in track in your head that he's from the South and he's from the North, you'll start to get loopy. This is why, again, the three. But we start with Lincoln, and I think a thing a lot of people forget is that he had when he was running, I think, for office or in office, he talked a lot about not actually getting rid of slavery. That he said this wasn't sort of the cause, his reason to fight. It'd been building for a while. We don't get too in-depth in the buildup. Again, it could be its own book. But he did say, I'm not trying to get rid of the slaves. It's only later in this book when he decides to do the Emancipation Proclamation. And it does make clear that some of that might have been to do with unifying his party in Congress, because it was, of course, a heated argument. And some people were very much against slavery, and others saw it as a states' right issue, or whatever the case may be. But in any case, we're going to have a civil war. The Southern sort of senators, congressmen, essentially leave. And then who's left there? Even amongst that, he's starting to have a division. So he decides, I can do the Emancipation Proclamation, that all slaves are free. And he goes into some of the detail of him being aware that he cannot enforce it because you have half the country not listening, right? He's also, he knows it could backlash, because the moment he takes that step, then the South will be like, look, we told you all along he was lying. He's a liar. And you could theoretically lose, I think, Missouri, I want to say, was a neutral. What if they decide, like, I'm going to split and go to the South? I don't like, there's still issues that could have happened. It's a live wire situation. But the generals and his advisors even told him, hold on and wait until we have a string of victories. Again, it happens later in the book. What's history, when you read a lot of history as books, not as textbooks, so much, has a way of coalescing in your brain in really fun ways. It is like what is it? MCU, an extended universe where all the movies start to relate to one another in a fun way. It actually happened, but you start to see these connections. And I don't think you can read this without seeing a lot of parallels to your old WW2, World War II. Both sides. Some of this is World War I. Again, connects to a lot of wars. Both sides thought it'd be over quickly. In that time, in the 1800s, people would go into fight. This country gets invaded. It's done in 90 days and everything goes back to normal. So even the public is sort of seeing it in this light. A lot of people thought it'd be over quickly. Both sides, the North and the South, thought the other side didn't have a fight, any gumption to fight. The South, like Germany, had no real plan to actually win it. They had no way to go from where they were to Washington and then, squelch the whole thing. They had no real plan of victory. Also, like Germany versus sort of America, you couldn't touch their industry. And they have a moment in here where I think Sherman says it. He's hanging out in a Virginia guy's house in Ohio. I think Ohio. A lot of these guys were friends because they all went to West Point. They all fought in the Spanish-American War and all this in there. So they knew each other. So he's hanging out with this guy from Virginia. He reads in the paper like, we're going to go to war. Which there's a lot of newspaper wrangling happening here too. And he chucks it down and he's basically saying that y'all don't know what you're doing. Y'all being the South. He's saying, war isn't a pleasant thing. It's horrible. Also, your enemy, the North, is got some gumption. They're not going to sit down. They also can build in a way you can't. They can build a steam engine. They can build railroads. On and on we go. And you could barely make a shoe, which was true. The industry was in the North. And he's like, there's gonna be a lot of blood before this is done. He had an awareness that this could go very south for an extended amount of time. And he was basically right. But you constantly do that as you read. You constantly see these parallels to other events in history and how history really repeats itself. He also was aware, Sherman, that they're attached, right? So the South is fighting, and it's not like you can leave You know, if things had gone south in World War II, America had an ocean between us and the Germans. It's going to take a while for them to get over there. You have to deal with that water. In other wars, here's the Rhine. I can always escape behind this river, behind the English Channel, etc., etc. There's nothing there. Both sides can pour into each other. We get this. It's fun. It's actually fun to listen to. Both sides sort of dealing with their troops. The South had more professional soldiers, but they were cocky. They thought for sure these Northerners, blah, 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 they won't be able to fight. The North had less professionals, but it didn't stop any of them, the non-professionals, from thinking, right? They didn't know how to act like an army. What does that mean? If you haven't been trained, then what is the chain of command to you, right? So he's like, go over there, dig that ditch. And these Union guys are like, hold on. Are you going to say, please? You don't just talk to me like that. I'm a grown man. Even though you are in an army and you decided to fight, right? Other foreigners looking didn't understand how any of it was going to work. Union guys would go into areas and just start pillaging. At any moment, they could just wander off and relax in a stream, right? There was no discipline, and some of this hit both sides. But even basic Prussian discipline just wouldn't exist. Even what is the British discipline? It was non-existent. But when they fought, it was 1,000% dedication, which is it's just a wild juxtaposition. They would get into a fight and just absorb horrendous amounts of abuse in guns, in weather. There's mosquitoes, there's hot, there's swamp, there's all kind of terrain. They didn't have a lot of people leaving, right? I forget what they call that. Forget what you call it when you abandon your sort of army. I can't think of the word. Not disunion. In any case, they didn't have a lot of drop off. If dudes joined, they joined to fight. And it made another side problem in that they'd start to complain when their generals didn't go in and fight. Even they didn't understand tactics, them or sort of the public at large. They're like, look, we've been at war for 5 days. Why haven't you invaded? Why don't you just go do this? The generals understood. I'm like, I can't march my army 50 miles away from food. They'll die. They'll be captured. Which leads to another thing. And it's, again, some of the funnest parts of this book are these behind the scenes political fights. It wasn't Lee and Grant running both armies to begin with. I forget who, Johnson, I think, is running the Southern Army. There's some issue, or Lee is. I forget how it goes. In any case, there's a point where Lee's not fully in charge, or he is, but they send him to do a thing, retake such and such. And he gets like sort of an aristocrat guy and a self-made guy to be his sort of lower down commanders. I need you to do this and you to do that. And they can't get along. And it ruins the entire moment. He had a moment where he could have made a big capture. Ruin. 100% because these idiots didn't get along. Now, Lee took the heat on it publicly, but it's a different issue. The North had friction between McClellan and Lincoln. They didn't like each other. McClellan, I think, he would talk a big game. But then when the war started, he was getting, beat in the nose. He lost a bunch of the first fights and then sort of became a chicken. He kept constantly asking for more supplies. He would sort of thumb his nose at the president. And you're like, well, why can't you just fire him? I always think this when I read these books. MacArthur did the same thing. They always threaten to just quit. Everyone's always afraid to fire him. But you actually don't know if the next guy's going to be worse. It gets to be very tricky. You could lose other generals. Other people might go, well, you know what? He has no loyalty. This war's done. You lose the generals, the public, which was a big issue for the North. You were never so far from the public saying, you know what? Forget it. Let's just split it down the middle and let them have the South. So you have these odd non-bullet issues that are just as dangerous as any of the bullets. Oh, another thing that reminded me of World War II. Early on, like almost after the first shots are fired, Lincoln or the North, I forget which one, is like, the only way we consider it a win is unconditional surrender. That it's the exact same words that FDR uses in World War II. Unconditional surrender. There's a lot between winning and unconditional surrender. You really want no questions asked afterwards if you're asking for unconditional. And you can expect the hardest fight because you're not giving them anywhere to go. You're not saying, okay, but you can keep these states or this and that. He says it's all or nothing, which is kind of crazy. After the first loss, there's a guy from the New York Tribune, but he's, of course, one of many. Basically saying Lincoln should start thinking about surrender. But we should just sort of give up. After like one fight, after one battle, people already start to go, why don't we just quit? When you get too broad brush a stroke, you lose all these, EKG? You lose these up and downs on how it went day to day and how tenuous it could have been. But you don't lose them here. Very fun. Now, both Lincoln and Davis, running the South, decided to work very much with their legislative bodies. I think Davis ended up more so than Lincoln. They went and they formed some makeshift one, and he went to them with a lot of issues. And it was a constant back and forth. But what seems interesting to me, looking at it after the fact, is the one who's the most dictator ends up winning. And that's sort of accurate throughout history. Dictators always do best in these sort of wars. How anyone functions a war when you have to go to a Congress or a parliament and start explaining yourself is beyond me. Now, those areas, those nations seem to last longer, but the war isn't as clean, right? Marlborough essentially beat the Sun King, Louis XIV. And before he could just go claim victory, his parliament pulled the plug on his crap. Set the stage for more wars, etc. But so it's Lincoln who, even though he says all the right things, is the one who starts quickly just pulling the pin on rights. He's like, it's wartime, I got to do it this way. He pushed further, faster. Jefferson Davis was very old school, very much about the Constitution and this and that, and he wasn't going to run roughshod. But Lincoln was, and obviously it ended up giving him the W, the win. Now, when we get into some of the battles, I had no idea some of it went the way that it went. I think there was like one town where, New Orleans, I think, or somewhere thereabouts, Louisiana, some southern towns got taken fairly early in. And then the general left in charge. Of course, you have to take the town and then hold it. and in holding it, improve it. He's fixing sewers, he's fixing streets, he wants things orderly. Of course, the people, it's an occupied town. What are the citizens doing? They're giving them the business, treating them like crap. I think somewhere like spitting on soldiers or throwing rocks at them or something to this effect. And they did it to him one day. And he put a mandate out like any woman who's bad mouthing any troop and is caught doing it essentially will be treated like a prostitute. I mean, and if you know 1800s, it's pretty extreme to go from lady to be treated like a prostitute. And then people were like, does he even have the right to do it? And I'm like, what did they say? Might makes right. He had the army there. He had to do it. But I didn't get the sense in a casual overview, because the casual always ends up focused on the battles. But there's a lot of aftermath to battles. And it gives you a good sense of the aftermath. I think at some point, they had a problem with industry as well. And this is another thing that sort of throws me. In our modern time, right, if the American army goes to war, then we expect sort of America to line up behind that army. But in history, armies just can move around. And then the world itself just sort of looks at it. And so, like, if it comes to your town, you're like, hey, be cool. And the army's like, I'm going to be cool. Or sometimes they're like, I'm going to pillage everything. So I think at some point, Napoleon's army, as they're fleeing from Russia, any stragglers, the towns around would just kill them. Now, obviously, they're outside of their own country. But we had a lot of that in Europe, where just a pocket sort of an army would show up and take over this little country, and the rest of that country is just like immune to it. So they'll sell them guns, they'll do this, they'll do that. Well, that was happening in America. I think Sherman complained about Ohio providing more weapons to the South than were used against their troops. And there's no law that stops that. And you had a problem with it. I had no idea industry was moving like this. There was a massive black market. Also, speaking of markets, one of the big ideas I didn't know, one of the big ideas the South had was that Europe would come in and help us in the war. The French would come. They'd see it as a new revolution, like they did in the American Revolution. They really saw themselves as the American Revolution times the part 2. Europe was sort of more standoffish, but the South was sure they'll need our cotton at some point because they need clothes. So when that happens, they'll come help us. Problem is, like England or some of these other countries had a massive cotton boom. So they didn't actually need the cotton. So they could just wait it out, which is what they did. I didn't know that both sides were scared of Europe getting involved. I don't know how it would have looked had Europe got involved. There was at one point, I didn't know this either, where a detachment was sent sort of from Texas, Arizona area. They had some weird idea. They're going to take land or mines or something from over there, because they were already thinking, again, they thought it'd be over quick. They were like, after the war, I'll have this mini army established. And then the South can then go take some of Mexico, because why shouldn't we conquer more? We'd need more land. I had no idea that people had ideas of further conquest after the Civil War. Again, the map would have looked way different if Texas owned Mexico, right? You'd have the whole Gulf of Mexico. And speaking of Gulf of Mexico, I think the biggest surprise, maybe the biggest surprise for me in the whole book, was the naval warfare. I had no idea it was this big of an issue. Quickly, the North with its navy, what are the towns? Wilmington, Charleston, Savannah. I think they went New Orleans. They went and took a bunch of the port cities along America. They blockaded the South End. They weren't going to let them sell their cotton out to the world. And then the South had no way to undo this. If your opponent has a naval superiority, I don't see historically how they lose that often. I think it's some of the reason why the Punic Wars, is that what it is? Maybe I got the name wrong. The war between Rome and Carthage. I think that's why it was so vicious. Both of them had strong navies. So it could keep armies literally afloat. So the fact that the South was hampered in this way, and they could do nothing about it. I think they had an idea to go take them, but they didn't have enough troops. Material. There's not enough cannons. About 5 minutes in, every general is asking for more cannons. But there was a ship called the Alabama. They get this guy, and they're like, okay, we've got a ship. I need you to make it into a warship. Because they're starting to make ironclads. This is just essentially the forerunner to battleships. Just make the boat all metal so the guns can't do anything to it. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. He gets there, and instead of it like needing a few parts and pieces, it's essentially like a boat in pieces. It's useless. So he has to completely build the whole thing. He gets the iron, he gets it. He makes one. It's one metal boat. Flip to the other side. The guy in charge of the North's Navy is told to go upstream of the Mississippi for reasons. He didn't like it. He liked being in the open ocean. He's not used to a river war. He went upstream because that's what he's told to do. And the tide's starting to turn. So he's getting antsy about not getting stuck in the river until the summer or the winter or whatever the season changes. He could be stuck there for months. This fool makes this boat called the Alabama on the Confederate side and then just rolls right into a fight. He's like, well, there's some boats that away. I'm going to go to them. So he just starts steaming it over. It's rickety. It can barely move. The engine keeps blowing out. But they make their way in. Once it's in sight of the enemy, it's like it doesn't mess up again. It's just humming now. The other ships see it. They don't know the Confederates have this weapon. They're like, hey, it must be one of ours. Till they realize it's not one of ours. It goes head first into like 3 boats. It's taking fire from all sides, dealing damage everywhere because it doesn't have any. You shoot any direction, you're going to hit an enemy. It's just dealing damage. And then it plows through more guys. It ends up fighting like 6 other boats, damaging everybody, blasting everyone. I think they lose 1 or 2 guys and then mosey on out. Then they go and hide in a particular harbor on the river with the cannons overhead. So the other guy's like, well, I got to go get that ship. I can't leave them. I'm not going to leave a fight, which is the Navy does this a lot. Old school Navy. They'll go get in a scrap. He tries to take him out, but he can't get close to the gun. That guy can't get out because his engine's broke. But when they get close, he just starts shooting back at him. It's a complete hot mess. And that guy bugs out. He eventually gets the call like, you can go back to the ocean. He doesn't tell them they have this other ship. Why tell him? He gets what he wants. He wants to leave anyway. The crazy... Not crazy. It's not crazy. But it is kind of wild. But the way you see a lot of other stuff. That guy, the captain of that ship, after that sort of victory, ends up getting sick. He laid out on his bed. some order comes where the Confederate want to attack some town along the river, and that if the gunship can go down, the metal boat can go and take out those cannons, then the troops can come in. It'll all work out. He replied, yeah, I can do that. Gets sick. The second in command, that guy like takes over, which I think is a little unusual. That guy tries to race over there, literally like they're having to carry his sick bed. He hops a train. He's trying to catch his boat to get back on and be captain. I'm like, you can't just take a dude's captaincy because he's sick. A lot of these other cats, you give them something and they just like cling to it. So you're like, you can't take my guns, I'm in charge. So you have to haggle with them or, kick them out of their spot. This guy just takes his boat. This boat that had already fought like 6 other boats, that it was a complete victory all the time. He starts steaming it down. It's dying all the time. I'm like, why wouldn't you go slower? The destination's in sight when the engines die. The army tries to go in because they're supposed to go in at a certain time. Cannons aren't taken out. They're just taking massive damage. So then they just back out after a few hours. He's still stuck out there. They whip them off, then see him in the distance and like, oh, look, there's that boat. Let's go get it. And then this guy, instead of like taking his time and fixing the engine, panics and burns and sinks the ship. And that thus ends the Alabama's historic run. And you're like, bro, can you imagine how mad you'd be? The other guy didn't seem to be mad. I can't imagine how mad I'd be if I'm like, bro, I had nothing but wins with that vehicle, and you just roasted it your first time out. The crap are you doing? You could have sent a letter and say, scrap that until my guy gets healthy. The crap's not going anywhere. In this first book, again, in my head, a casual's look at the Civil War, you just see Lee versus Grant, and you think Grant was running the thing the whole time. He actually wasn't. He was much lower down, and for a while a bit on the outs. They got this kind of idea that maybe he took over some place and maybe enriched himself with what's there. This kind of thing. Again, not as unusual then as now. I can't imagine what we'd do now if we sent an admiral of the Navy out somewhere and he's just milking the people of Thailand or something for money. They wouldn't have seen it as unusual then, but we'd freak out now. That guy would go to jail. And that's essentially the book. Not what I said, but, how I said it. There are all these stories constantly. There's not even big delineations, not even in chapters. Mid-chapter will switch. The chapters don't have names. Maps could help if you had access to a bunch of Civil War maps while you listen. But the thing is, and here's how I'm taking it. I think this is going to be perfect for multiple readings. That the more you get historical Civil War stuff, the better this book will sound, because you know the places and you know the people. So I think I'm going to reread this again. Way down the line, obviously, I want to read a bunch of these, quote, side stories. I want the detail in each one, and then I'll reread the whole narrative. And I think I will like it. Because the parts that I do know start to stand out. And I'm just aware now of how much more I don't know. It's presented very well. All right. Ad time? I really do want, if I'm going to look for any book that's just on any individual battle in the Civil War. Also, individuals. I want a book on McClellan. I have a book on Sherman. I need a book on Grant. I definitely want the Robert E. Lee biography, just haven't got it yet. So, lots to look forward to. Now, I have to do this because obviously we all know I can't proceed further in modern American history until I'm done with LBJ. I'll have nothing spoil LBJ. I'm out of my mind. Okay. Thank you all for being here. I'll talk to you all next week.